The horizon's edge drifted through the void, its sleek hull cutting through the endless black. Captain Elias Voss leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked onto the glowing red signal pulsing on the holographic display. "Tell me I'm seeing things," he muttered. His communications officer, Lieutenant Rena Holt, ran another diagnostic. "No mistake, Captain. It's a distress signal. Old, but still broadcasting." "How old?" Holt hesitated. 213 years. The bridge went silent. The crew had heard of Epsilon Prime, but only in whispers. It was humanity's greatest tragedy, a colony built in defiance of the Silari Dominion, wiped from existence when its people dared to rise against their overlords. Official records said the Zenith Rebellion had been crushed completely. No survivors, no remains, just an empty, lifeless world. And yet here was a signal, a pulse in the dark. Voss turned to his navigator, Dario Finch. "How far out?" 2 days at Maxburn." "Captain," Holt's voice was tense. "If this is real, someone, or something, has been broadcasting this signal for over 2 centuries. That's impossible." Voss didn't respond. He was already running through the possibilities in his mind. A malfunctioning beacon, an old distress call caught in a loop. Or was it something worse? "Captain," his first officer, Lieutenant Commander Linasari, spoke up. "You know the Council's orders. Epsilon Prime is off limits. We set foot there, we're asking for trouble." "The Council's never set foot there," Voss countered. "They just accepted the Auxiliary's version of history and looked the other way." He turned back to the display, watching the red pulse flash in steady intervals, a distress call that had outlived the people who sent it. "I need to know the truth." Lynn exhaled sharply but nodded. "Then I suggest we go in quiet. No active scans, no unnecessary transmissions. If the Xilari catch us snooping around, we won't get a second chance." Voss smirked. "That's why I keep you around, Asari. You're paranoid in all the right ways." He turned back to the bridge crew. "Finch, set a course. Holt, start logging everything we have on Epsilon Prime. I want to know exactly what we're walking into." As the horizon's edge angled toward the dead world, the signal continued to pulse, steady as a heartbeat. Waiting. 200 years had passed since the Zenith Rebellion fell, but something on Epsilon Prime had never stopped calling for help. The horizon's edge sliced through the thick gray clouds of Epsilon Prime, its hull rattling against turbulent winds. Through the forward viewport, the crew caught their first glimpse of the dead world. Towering skyscrapers stood silent and lifeless, their metallic surfaces coated in centuries of dust. Roads stretched for miles, cracked and broken, leading to nowhere. The colony was intact, eerily so. No vegetation, no wildlife, Lynn murmured, analyzing the scanner data. Even after 200 years, nature hasn't reclaimed this place. Voss leaned forward, studying the view below. Because something kept it from decaying. The distress signal pulsed stronger now, leading them toward the heart of the city. The ship's sensors swept the ruins, but the results were unsettling. No signs of life. No bodies. It was as if the entire population had vanished into thin air. Finch guided the ship toward a massive landing pad, once meant for cargo freighters but now choked in silence. With a hiss of hydraulics, the horizon's edge touched down. Voss stood from his chair. "Lynn, Holt, you're with me. Finch, keep the ship running. If anything so much as twitches out there, I want to know about it." The ramp lowered, and the 3 of them stepped onto the ancient ground. The air was stale but breathable. Their boots crunched against fine dust, a layer of history undisturbed for centuries. "This place is wrong," Holt muttered, her voice hushed. They moved through the streets cautiously, weapons holstered but hands never far from them. Shadows stretched long in the dim, overcast light, and the silence pressed in on them like a living thing. Then they saw the first signs of struggle. Scorch marks on the walls, collapsed buildings, rusted Silari weaponry discarded on the ground. But still, no bodies. Voss knelt beside an abandoned plasma rifle, its alien design unmistakable. The auxiliary fought here, and they lost men. Then where the hell are they? Holt asked. Lynn checked her scanner, frowning. I don't know, but we're close to the distress signal. It's coming from beneath us. They reached what had once been the city's central command tower, now leaning at a precarious angle. At its base, a massive blast door sat embedded in the ground. Unlike the rest of the city, this door looked new. No rust, no wear, as if it had been maintained. Voss exchanged a glance with Lynn. Looks like we found our way in. Holt hesitated. Captain, if something's been down there for 200 years, still broadcasting a distress call, maybe it's not asking for help. Voss stepped forward, brushing dust from an ancient keypad. The moment his fingers touched the panel, the blast door let out a low mechanical groan. The locks disengage. The door began to slide open. From the depths below, a single red light flickered to life. Something was waiting for them. A cold, mechanical groan echoed through the ruins as the blast door slid open, releasing a gust of stale, pressurized air. Dust swirled around Voss and his team as they peered into the darkness below. The red light flickered again, illuminating a rusted stairwell that descended deep beneath the surface. Holt tightened her grip on her rifle. This is a terrible idea. Voss ignored her and activated his wrist-mounted flashlight. Only one way to find out what's down there. He took the first step, and the others followed, their boots clanking against metal as they descended into the unknown. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. It was heavier, charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a vast underground facility. Dim emergency lights lined the walls, still flickering after 2 centuries. The architecture was human, industrial, functional, but beneath it, something else lurked. A presence. Then Lynn's scanner beeped. Life signs, she whispered, eyes widening. Weak, but there are people down here. Voss moved forward cautiously, following the scanner's readings. They passed empty hallways, abandoned control stations, and crates filled with long-forgotten supplies. At the heart of the facility, they entered a massive chamber lined with rows of towering stasis pods. There were thousands of them. Inside each pod, a human figure lay frozen in time. The glass was fogged from age, but Voss could see their faces, men and women clad in battle-worn armor, their bodies preserved as if they had gone to sleep in the middle of a war. Holt took a step back. No way. This shouldn't be possible. Voss exhaled slowly. It's not just possible. It's real. Lynn moved to a nearby console, wiping away the dust and activating its interface. The holographic display sputtered to life, its data scrolling in Old Terran Standard. Her breath hitched. These people. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. They're the Zenith Rebellion. Voss's stomach tightened. The rebellion had been wiped out. That's what history claimed. But history had been a lie. A sudden mechanical beep cut through the silence. The pod at the center of the room hummed to life, its frost-covered glass shifting from opaque to clear. Inside, a man lay motionless, his face battle-hardened, his features frozen in time. Then his eyes snapped open. The pod hissed, its locks disengaging. With a sharp gasp, the man lurched forward, pulling in his first breath in over 2 centuries. His piercing gaze locked onto Voss, and in an instant he moved. Before Voss could react, the man ripped free of the pod and lunged, grabbing Voss by the collar. What year is it? His voice was hoarse, raw with age and fury. Voss barely managed to answer. 213 years since the fall of Epsilon Prime. The man's grip tightened, his expression darkening. The war, he growled. Tell me we won. Voss hesitated, and in that hesitation, the fire in the man's eyes reignited. The war was far from over. A cold, mechanical groan echoed through the ruins as the blast door slid open, releasing a gust of stale, pressurized air. Dust swirled around Voss and his team as they peered into the darkness below. The red light flickered again, illuminating a rusted stairwell that descended deep beneath the surface. Holt tightened her grip on her rifle. "This is a terrible idea." Voss ignored her and activated his wrist-mounted flashlight. Only one way to find out what's down there. He took the first step, and the others followed, their boots clanking against metal as they descended into the unknown. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. It was heavier, charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a vast underground facility. Dim emergency lights lined the walls, still flickering after 2 centuries. The architecture was human, industrial, functional, but beneath it, something else lurked. A presence. Then Lynn's scanner beeped. "Life signs," she whispered, eyes widening. "Weak, but there are people down here." Voss moved forward cautiously, following the scanner's readings. They passed empty hallways, abandoned control stations, and crates filled with long-forgotten supplies. At the heart of the facility, they entered a massive chamber lined with rows of towering stasis pods. There were thousands of them. Inside each pod, a human figure lay frozen in time. The glass was fogged from age, but Voss could see their faces, men and women clad in battle-worn armor, their bodies preserved as if they had gone to sleep in the middle of a war. Holt took a step back. "No way. This shouldn't be possible." Voss exhaled slowly. "It's not just possible. It's real." Lynn moved to a nearby console, wiping away the dust and activating its interface. The holographic display sputtered to life, its data scrolling in Old Terran Standard. Her breath hitched. "These people..." She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're the Zenith Rebellion." Voss's stomach tightened. The rebellion had been wiped out. That's what history claimed. But history had been a lie. A sudden mechanical beep cut through the silence. The pod at the center of the room hummed to life, its frost-covered glass shifting from opaque to clear. Inside, a man lay motionless, his face battle-hardened, his features frozen in time. Then his eyes snapped open. The pod hissed, its locks disengaging. With a sharp gasp, the man lurched forward, pulling in his first breath in over 2 centuries. His piercing gaze locked onto Voss, and in an instant he moved. Before Voss could react, the man ripped free of the pod and lunged, grabbing Voss by the collar. "What year is it?" His voice was hoarse, raw with age and fury. Voss barely managed to answer. 213 years since the fall of Epsilon Prime. The man's grip tightened, his expression darkening. "The war," he growled. "Tell me we won." Voss hesitated, and in that hesitation, the fire in the man's eyes reignited. The war was far from over. Alarms shrieked through the underground facility, their echoes bouncing off rusted walls. Lynn's fingers flew across the console as she scanned the data streaming in from the horizon's edge. Silari warships just entered orbit, she reported, voice tight with urgency. They're running full scans of the surface. Voss clenched his jaw. "They know we're here." Rose stepped forward, his movements sharp despite his long stasis. "Then we don't have time to waste." He turned toward the still frozen revolutionaries. "We wake them up. Now." Holt's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. They'd been frozen for 200 years. We don't even know if..." Ro didn't wait. He slammed his fist against the control panel, overriding safety protocols. A deep mechanical hum filled the chamber as row after row of stasis pods flickered to life. The facility trembled under the weight of its own awakening. The first pod hissed open. A woman collapsed forward, gasping for breath. Her armor bore the Zenith Rebellion's insignia, faded but still defiant. Others followed, staggering out of their pods, confusion and instinctual battle readiness flashing in their eyes. A soldier clutched his head, groaning. Where are we?" Rose's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. On Epsilon Prime, 2 centuries after we fell. The room went still. Another soldier, face lined with premature age, stared at him in shock. 2 centuries. Ro nodded, his voice low but unshakable. We lost. The war never ended. The Xilari buried us, hoping we'd never rise again. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the soldiers now awake and listening. Well, guess what? We're still here, and we have one last shot. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, one by one, the soldiers straightened. Whatever disorientation they felt didn't matter. They had fought against impossible odds before. They would do it again. Voss watched in stunned silence. These people had woken up in a future they didn't belong to. And yet, their eyes burned with the same fire as before. The horizon's edge crackled over comms. Captain Finch's voice came through, tense and urgent. Xilari ground forces inbound. They're deploying dropships. Lynn swore. They're coming to finish the job. Ro turned to Voss. We have the numbers now. Get us to the pulse cannon, and we'll win this fight. Voss exhaled sharply, then nodded. Then let's move. The facility's doors groaned open, revealing the ruins above. The Zenith rebels, soldiers out of time, armed themselves with whatever weapons they could salvage. As the first Xilari ships descended, their sleek black hulls blotting out the sky, Ro's voice rang out like thunder. For humanity. And the war that never ended began again. The ruins of Epsilon Prime erupted into chaos. Xilari dropships descended like hunting birds, their sleek hulls gleaming under the pale light. Troop carriers slammed into the cracked pavement, releasing squads of alien soldiers clad in segmented black armor. Their rifles hissed as they powered up, glowing with lethal plasma. Ro stood at the front of his newly awakened army, his breath steady despite the storm unfolding around them. He had spent 200 years in the dark, waiting for this moment. He refused to let it slip away. Voss crouched behind a broken transport vehicle, rifle in hand. Lynn, how close are we to getting the pulse cannon online? Lynn's voice crackled through the comms. Not close enough. The power systems are fried. We need a massive energy source to reboot it. Voss swore under his breath. The pulse cannon was the key to stopping the Xilari fleet, but without power, it was nothing more than a relic. Ro turned toward him. What about your ship? Voss hesitated. The horizon's edge. It's not designed to power a superweapon. Maybe not. Lynn chimed in. But its core could provide a one-time surge. If we wire it directly into the pulse cannon, we might be able to get a single shot off. Voss's stomach twisted. You're saying we have to destroy our only way off this planet. Lynn's silence was answer enough. Before Voss could respond, an explosion ripped through the street. A Xilari assault walker, a towering four-legged war machine, stormed through the ruins, its plasma cannons charging. We don't have time for second guesses, Ro shouted. We either take back this world, or we die here. Voss made his decision. He pressed his comms. Finch, prep the horizon's edge for emergency power transfer, and when I give the order, I want you off that ship. Understood. Finch's reply was immediate. Understood, Captain. But this better be worth it. Voss turned back to Ro. Buy me time. Ro smirked. With pleasure. He lifted his rifle and let out a battle cry. For humanity. The Zenith rebels roared in response, charging forward. Plasma fire streaked across the battlefield, rebels diving into cover as Xilari troops advanced. Ro moved like a ghost of war, taking down enemies with lethal precision. Voss sprinted through the wreckage, dodging incoming fire as he reached Lynn. She was already patching a direct link between the horizon's edge and the pulse cannon. Systems initializing. She called out. We'll have one shot, but it's gonna take a few more minutes. Voss looked toward the sky. The Xilari warships were moving into position. They were running out of time. The ground trembled as the auxiliary assault walker fired another plasma barrage, reducing an ancient building to rubble. Zenith rebels scattered, taking cover behind broken transport vehicles and collapsed walls. Ro barked orders, leading his soldiers in a desperate push, but they were outgunned and outnumbered. On the other side of the battlefield, Voss knelt beside Lynn, shielding her as sparks flew from the control panel she was working on. "How much longer?" he shouted over the chaos. Lynn gritted her teeth, furiously typing commands. "The transfer's at 90%. We just need." A deafening boom shook the air. Voss turned just in time to see a auxiliary aerial gunship streaking toward them, its weapons charging. "Oh, hell no," Holt muttered, raising her rifle. She fired a well-placed shot at the gunship's exposed thrusters, sending it spinning off course. It slammed into a crumbling tower and exploded, the shockwave knocking them all off their feet. Lynn coughed, her face covered in dust. "Okay, that was too close." Voss pulled her up. "Tell me we're ready." Lynn glanced at the interface, then grinned. "We're ready." Voss pressed his comm. "Finch, it's time. Get off the horizon's edge. Now." There was a pause, then Finch's voice came through. "Leaving the ship, Captain. Hope this works." Above them, the horizon's edge shuddered as its energy core drained, sending massive power surges through the underground conduits. The entire city seemed to wake up. Old streetlights flickered. Abandoned consoles blinked to life. And then, with a thunderous clank, the pulse cannon's activation sequence completed. Deep beneath the ruins, ancient machinery groaned as the weapon prepared to fire. Ro, still leading the charge, saw the shift immediately. He pressed his comm. "Voss, tell me it's working." Voss grinned. "You're gonna love this." The ground beneath them vibrated as an enormous section of the city collapsed inward, revealing the pulse cannon, a massive ancient construct embedded into the planet itself. Its barrel, large enough to swallow a auxiliary warship whole, began humming with power. From orbit, the auxiliary commander issued a final transmission. "Human forces, you are surrounded. Surrender or be annihilated." Voss smirked. "I don't think so." He turned to Lynn. "Fire." Lynn slammed her palm onto the final control panel. The pulse cannon roared to life. A massive energy surge erupted from its core, ripping through the atmosphere like a wrathful god's judgment. In orbit, the auxiliary fleet had no time to react. The blast struck their lead warship first, sending a chain reaction of energy surges through the entire fleet. One by one, the warships flickered, then died. Engines failed. Weapons systems went offline. The once mighty auxiliary armada now hung lifeless in space, defenseless. On the ground, the remaining auxiliary troops hesitated. Their entire chain of command had just vanished. Ro seized the moment. He raised his weapon high. "Take them down." The Zenith Rebellion charge. And the tide of battle turned. The battlefield had transformed in an instant. One moment, the auxiliary forces were overwhelming, their war machines crushing everything in their path. The next, their fleet was dead in orbit, and their troops on the ground hesitated, their helmets turning skyward in confusion and fear. Ro wasted no time. "No mercy," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the ruins. "They showed us none. We return the favor." The Zenith rebels surged forward, fueled by 2 centuries of vengeance. Plasma fire erupted from both sides, but the auxiliary lacked coordination now. With their fleet disabled, their tactical advantage crumbled. Holt took cover behind a wrecked drone, picking off auxiliary officers with precise shots. "I think they just realized they're screwed." Voss pressed his comm. "Finch, status." Finch's voice crackled through. "I'm on the ground. Ship's dead, but I'm alive." He paused. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen." Voss grinned despite the chaos. "Welcome to history." Nearby, Lynn was accessing the facility's command center. "Captain, I'm pulling old Zenith override codes. I can disable their remaining ground vehicles. Do it. A few seconds later, the Xilari walkers and drones powered down, leaving the alien soldiers exposed. The battle quickly turned into a rout. The remaining Xilari, realizing their predicament, began throwing down their weapons. Ro walked among them, his rifle still raised. A Xilari officer hissed in defiance. You think this changes anything? The Dominion will come. They will burn this place again. Ro stared at him, then pulled the trigger. The officer crumpled to the ground. They can try, Ro growled. The remaining Xilari troops fell to their knees, surrendering without another word. Silence settled over the ruins of Epsilon Prime. Smoke curled from the wreckage, the last remnants of battle fading into the sky. Voss stepped beside Ro, exhaling deeply. It's over. Ro turned to him. No, Captain. This was just the beginning. He gestured to the rebels, hundreds of them, now standing victorious on the battlefield. We won today, but the Dominion will return. And when they do, they won't just be facing a few lost soldiers from the past. His gaze hardened. They'll be facing a new war. Lin approached, arms crossed. We don't have a fleet. We don't have a supply chain. We have one planet. Ro smirked. And we just proved that one planet is enough to shake the Dominion to its core. Voss looked up at the sky, where the dead Xilari warships floated like gravestones. The story of Epsilon Prime wasn't one of failure anymore. It was one of defiance. He nodded. Then let's make sure they never forget. As the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in centuries, the ashes of a forgotten revolution became the spark of something far greater. Humanity was rising again.